The transport shuttle's engines hummed with a frequency that made Marcus Chen's teeth ache. He pressed his face against the viewport, watching as the massive structure of Kepler Station grew larger with each passing moment. The station was a marvel of interstellar engineering, a spinning wheel of gleaming metal and crystalline domes that housed the galaxy's most prestigious academy for advanced sciences and tactical studies. Marcus adjusted his worn Earth Standard uniform and checked his acceptance letter for the 100th time. The holographic seal of the Galactic Consortium Academy flickered blue and gold, confirming what still felt impossible. A human had been accepted into the most exclusive educational institution in known space, where only the brightest minds from dozens of species came to study. The shuttle docked with a gentle thud that resonated through the hull. Marcus gathered his single duffel bag and joined the queue of beings making their way through the airlock. The diversity was staggering. Tall, crystalline Vextari beings chimed softly as they moved, their translucent bodies refracting the station's artificial light into rainbow patterns. A group of insectoid Kythera clicked and chittered in their complex language, their compound eyes tracking every movement around them. Near the front, a massive Urdox delegate lumbered forward on 6 thick legs, its boulder-like hide scarred from what must have been centuries of experience. Marcus had studied these species extensively during his preparation, but seeing them in person was entirely different. He was acutely aware that he was the only human among nearly 200 new students, and the curious stares he received made it clear that his presence was unexpected. The orientation hall was a vast amphitheater that could have held 10,000 beings comfortably. The ceiling was transparent aluminum, providing a breathtaking view of the stars beyond. Students settled into seats that automatically adjusted to accommodate their various physiologies, while Marcus found himself in a standard chair that was clearly designed with humanoid species in mind. A figure emerged onto the central platform, and the hall fell silent. Professor Zethmar was a legend throughout the galaxy, a being whose species Marcus couldn't immediately identify. The professor stood nearly 3 meters tall, with 6 arms that moved with fluid precision and a head that seemed to shift and change as though it were made of living shadow. When Zethmar spoke, the words came not through sound but directly into the minds of every student present, translated perfectly into their native languages. "Welcome, future leaders of the consortium." The professor's mental voice resonated with authority and ancient wisdom. "You are here because your species have identified you as exceptional. Each of you represents the pinnacle of intellectual achievement from your respective worlds." Marcus felt the weight of those words. Earth's selection process had been brutal. From a population of nearly 12 billion, only he had qualified for the Academy's entrance requirements. The tests had been unlike anything in human educational history, requiring not just knowledge, but the ability to think in ways that transcended traditional human logic. "Your first challenge begins now," Professor Zethmar continued. "Before you can officially begin your studies, you must demonstrate that you possess the fundamental quality required of all Academy graduates, the ability to perceive solutions where others see only obstacles." The professor's 6 arms moved in a complex pattern, and the air in front of each student began to shimmer. Small objects materialized on their desks, boxes that seemed to be made of the same shifting material as the professor's head. Each box was roughly the size of a human fist, with surfaces that rippled and changed, displaying patterns that hurt to look at directly. "These are void puzzles," Zethmar explained, "created by the ancient Nethi civilization. They have confounded scholars for over 10,000 years. Each puzzle is unique, tailored to test the problem-solving capabilities of the being attempting to solve it. Some students complete their puzzles within hours. Others require days or even weeks. A few never solve them at all." Marcus stared at his puzzle box, watching as symbols and geometric patterns flowed across its surface like living things. The patterns seemed familiar somehow, as though he had seen them before in dreams or half-remembered visions. He reached out tentatively and touched the box. The moment his fingers made contact, the box's surface became warm, almost alive. The patterns on its faces began to pulse with a rhythm that matched his heartbeat. Around the hall, other students were examining their own puzzles with varying degrees of confusion and concentration. "You have unlimited time to solve your puzzles," Zethmar announced. "However, classes begin in 3 days. Those who have not completed their puzzles by then will be given additional remedial training before joining the regular curriculum." The implication was clear. Failing to solve the puzzle quickly would mark a student as intellectually inferior from the very beginning of their academic career. Marcus could see the competitive tension in the room as students bent over their boxes, some already manipulating surfaces and testing various approaches. Marcus lifted his puzzle box and examined it more closely. The material felt like warm stone, but with a flexibility that suggested it might be organic. The symbols flowing across its surface were definitely mathematical in nature, but they followed no system he recognized. There were elements that reminded him of Earth's geometry, but twisted in ways that suggested additional dimensions. He closed his eyes and let his mind drift, a technique he had learned during his preparation for the Academy entrance exams. The key to solving truly alien problems, he had discovered, was to stop thinking like a human and start thinking like the problem itself. When he opened his eyes again, the puzzle box's patterns had changed. Now they seemed less chaotic, more purposeful. He could see connections between symbols that had been invisible before, mathematical relationships that existed in folded space rather than flat dimensions. His fingers moved instinctively, pressing certain symbols in sequence. Each touch caused the box to respond with subtle vibrations and color changes. The patterns began to align, forming coherent structures that revealed the underlying logic of the puzzle. Marcus became aware that other students had stopped working on their own puzzles and were watching him. The Vexthari nearest to him chimed in what he assumed was surprise, while several Kithara had turned their compound eyes in his direction. He ignored the attention and continued working. The puzzle was revealing itself to be more complex than he had initially thought. It wasn't just a matter of manipulating the external patterns. The box itself existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and solving it required understanding how to navigate spaces that normal three-dimensional thinking couldn't encompass. Time seemed to slow as Marcus worked. His human brain, evolved for pattern recognition and tool use, found unexpected synergies with the alien logic of the puzzle. Where other species might approach the problem through pure mathematics or mystical intuition, Marcus used a combination of spatial reasoning and creative problem-solving that was uniquely human. The box began to warm further, and the patterns on its surface started to converge toward a single point on the top face. Marcus could feel the solution approaching, like a word on the tip of his tongue that was about to reveal itself. With a final, decisive motion, he pressed the convergence point. The box opened. A collective gasp filled the amphitheater as a column of pure light erupted from the puzzle box, rising 20 meters into the air before dissolving into sparkles that fell like snow. The box itself had transformed, its surfaces now smooth and translucent, revealing an intricate crystal structure within that pulsed with gentle bioluminescence. Professor Zethmar's shadow-like head turned toward Marcus with what might have been surprise. The mental voice that reached Marcus carried a note of genuine astonishment. "Remarkable," Zethmar said, addressing the entire hall while keeping attention focused on Marcus. "In my 4 centuries of teaching at this academy, I have never seen a student solve a void puzzle without first taking time to understand its basic operational principles. Young human, how long did you spend preparing for this challenge?" Marcus stood, acutely aware that every being in the hall was staring at him. "I didn't prepare for it specifically, Professor. I had never heard of void puzzles before today." The silence that followed was profound. Marcus could hear the subtle mechanical sounds of the station's life support systems, the distant hum of artificial gravity generators, even the barely audible breathing of the beings around him. "You solve a 10,000-year-old puzzle by intuition alone. The question came from a Kithera student whose mandibles clicked with what Marcus had learned with skepticism. Not intuition exactly, Marcus replied carefully. Pattern recognition combined with three-dimensional thinking. Humans evolved as tool users and hunters. We're naturally good at seeing how complex systems fit together and predicting how they'll behave when manipulated. A Vex theory student chimed in harmonious notes that the Hall's translation system rendered as words. But the puzzle exists in 11 dimensions. How can three-dimensional thinking solve an 11-dimensional problem? Marcus looked down at the transformed box in his hands. I think I was using more than 3 dimensions without realizing it. The human brain processes information in ways we don't fully understand yet. We might think we're only seeing in 3 dimensions, but our pattern recognition systems work with much more complex data sets. Professor Zethmar approached Marcus's desk, moving with surprising grace despite the alien physiology. "May I examine your solution path?" the professor asked. Marcus handed over the puzzle box. Zethmar's 6 arms moved over it in intricate patterns, and the box responded by displaying holographic images of the solution sequence Marcus had followed. "Extraordinary," Zethmar murmured, the mental voice filled with academic excitement. "You bypassed 17 traditional solution branches and discovered a path that our greatest puzzle theorists have never documented. This approach suggests cognitive processes that operate outside conventional logical frameworks." The professor turned to address the entire hall. "Students, what you have witnessed today is why the Academy values diversity of thought. The human approach to problem-solving appears to involve cognitive strategies that complement rather than compete with traditional methods. This young scholar has demonstrated that sometimes the most effective solutions come from thinking in ways that seem impossible to those trained in conventional approaches." Marcus felt heat rising in his cheeks as hundreds of alien eyes, sensors, and other sensory organs focused on him with renewed interest. He had hoped to blend in, to prove that humans could keep up with galactic standards. Instead, he had apparently done something unprecedented. "Professor," Marcus said, raising his hand tentatively, "if I may ask, what exactly did I do differently?" Zethmar's head tilted in what might have been amusement. "You treated the puzzle as though it were a living system rather than a mechanical device. Most beings approach void puzzles through mathematical analysis or mystical meditation. You appeared to develop an emotional connection with the puzzle, responding to its behavior as though you were communicating with it rather than solving it." The observation struck Marcus as accurate. He had felt as though the puzzle was trying to show him something, like it wanted to be solved, and was offering hints about how to proceed. "Humans are social creatures," he said, thinking aloud. "We evolved to read intentions and predict behavior in other living beings. Maybe I was unconsciously treating the puzzle like a person who was trying to communicate something important." The reaction from the other students was immediate and intense. Chittering, chiming, and sounds Marcus couldn't classify filled the air as the translation systems worked overtime to render dozens of simultaneous conversations into comprehensible speech. "Anthropomorphic problem-solving," one voice said. "Treating mathematical systems as social entities," said another. "Emotional logic," said a third. Professor Zethmar raised all 6 arms, and the hall fell silent again. "Indeed, students, what we may have witnessed is an entirely new approach to complex problem-solving. The ability to form intuitive connections with non-living systems could represent a significant advancement in how we approach seemingly intractable challenges." Marcus looked around the hall and realized that his status among his fellow students had shifted dramatically. Where before he had been an oddity, possibly a charity case admitted to fill some kind of diversity quota, he was now being regarded as a genuine intellectual peer. The change was both thrilling and terrifying. "All students should continue working on their puzzles," Zethmar announced. "Those who complete them are welcome to begin preliminary studies in the Academy's library systems. Classes will begin as scheduled in 3 days." As the professor departed, and students began to disperse. Marcus found himself surrounded by beings eager to understand his approach. Questions came rapid-fire in multiple languages, with translation systems struggling to keep up. A young urdox, smaller than the massive specimens Marcus had seen before, but still twice his size, approached with careful steps. "Human Marcus, would you be willing to explain your method in more detail? My puzzle displays similar patterns to yours, but I cannot perceive the connections you describe." Marcus looked at the urdox's puzzle box. The patterns were indeed similar, but whereas it felt warm and responsive, this one seemed cold and inert. "What's your name?" he asked. "I am called Stone Beneath Stars," the urdox replied, the name rumbling through the translation system like distant thunder. "Stone Beneath Stars, may I touch your puzzle?" The urdox extended the box with surprising delicacy, given the thick, rocky appearance of their limbs. The moment Marcus's fingers touched the surface, the patterns began to shift and pulse, just as his own had done. "Fascinating," chimed a Vextheri who had approached to observe. "The puzzle responds to human contact, even when it was not created for humans." Marcus studied the box carefully. "I think the key is not to think about solving it," he said slowly. "Try to imagine that the puzzle wants to be solved, and it's trying to show you how. Look for patterns that feel like they're moving toward something, not just random changes." Stone Beneath Stars accepted the box back and held it with newfound attention. Within moments, the patterns began to respond to the urdox's touch in ways they hadn't before. "Remarkable," the urdox rumbled. "It is as though the puzzle has become alive." Over the next hour, Marcus found himself inadvertently teaching a masterclass in human-style problem-solving to a diverse group of the galaxy's brightest students. He helped a Kithra understand how to listen to the puzzle's feedback, showed a Vextheri how to feel the mathematical relationships instead of just calculating them, and guided several other species through approaches that combined logic with intuition. By the time the orientation hall began to empty, 7 more students had successfully opened their void puzzles using adaptations of Marcus's methods. The transformed boxes created a small constellation of gentle lights in the dimming hall, their crystal hearts pulsing in subtle harmony. As Marcus gathered his belongings and prepared to find his assigned quarters, he reflected on the strange turn his first day had taken. He had come to the academy hoping to prove that humanity belonged among the galaxy's intellectual elite. Instead, he had apparently demonstrated that humans might have something unique to contribute to that elite. The thought was both humbling and exciting. If his approach to problem-solving was truly novel, it meant that humanity's perspective might be valuable in ways that went far beyond simply keeping up with alien science and technology. It suggested that humans might actually help advance the collective knowledge of the entire consortium. As he walked through the station's corridors toward the student quarters, Marcus passed the Academy's famous hall of unsolved problems. Through the transparent walls, he could see displays of challenges that had confounded the greatest minds in the galaxy for centuries or millennia. Mathematical theorems with no known proofs, engineering problems with no apparent solutions, philosophical questions with no satisfactory answers. For the first time since leaving Earth, Marcus felt truly excited about what lay ahead. If human problem-solving methods could unlock void puzzles that had stumped alien minds for 10,000 years, what other impossibilities might become possible with the right approach? The human had solved the puzzle before taking a seat. Now, as he settled into his new life among the stars, Marcus Chun began to wonder what other puzzles the galaxy might offer to a mind that had learned to think like both a scientist and a dreamer. 3 weeks into his studies at the Galactic Consortium Academy, Marcus Chun had settled into what could generously be called a routine, though nothing about life among dozens of alien species could truly be considered normal. His dormitory pod was located in Section C7, between Stone Beneath Stars the Urdox and a Vextheri named Harmony of Distant Suns, who communicated primarily through crystalline chimes that the translation systems rendered as poetry. The Academy's curriculum was unlike anything Marcus had experienced on Earth. Rather than traditional lectures, students participated in what the Academy called immersion learning, where complex concepts were directly downloaded into their neural pathways through quantum-linked educational matrices. The process felt like remembering something he had always known, but had temporarily forgotten, though the knowledge was often so alien to human understanding that it took days to properly integrate. Marcus was currently struggling with a course called Multidimensional Engineering Principles, taught by Professor Vexnull, a being who existed partially in normal space and partially in what she called the probability void. During her lectures, Professor Vexnull would frequently phase in and out of visible reality, leaving behind only equations written in light that students were expected to solve before she returned. The fundamental challenge of engineering in 11-dimensional space, Professor Vexnull's voice echoed from somewhere between dimensions, is that conventional materials exist primarily in only 3 dimensions, with minor extensions into the 4th through quantum mechanics. To build truly stable structures, one must either compress higher dimensional materials into lower dimensional space or expand lower dimensional materials into higher dimensions. Marcus raised his hand, which was still considered an oddly primitive gesture by most of his classmates. "Professor, how do you determine which approach is more appropriate for a given project?" Professor Vexnull materialized slowly, her form flickering like a badly tuned hologram. "An excellent question, Marcus-chun. Most species approach this decision through mathematical optimization algorithms. However, your recent work suggests that humans might have intuitive methods for making such determinations. Perhaps you could share your perspective?" The request made Marcus uncomfortable. Ever since solving the void puzzle on his first day, his professors had been treating him less like a student and more like a research subject. Every approach he took to problems was analyzed and documented, as though his human perspective was a phenomenon to be studied rather than simply another way of thinking. "I think humans use pattern matching," Marcus said carefully. "We look at similar problems we've solved before and try to identify which features are most relevant to the current situation. Then, we make educated guesses based on what worked previously." A Kithara student named Sharp Edge of Thought clicked disapprovingly. "But such an approach lacks mathematical rigor. How can you be confident in solutions based on mere pattern matching?" "We test them," Marcus replied. "Humans are comfortable with being wrong as long as we can learn from our mistakes. We'd rather try something that might work than spend too much time calculating something that definitely works, but might not be the best solution." The classroom fell into one of those profound silences that Marcus was becoming accustomed to. He had learned that alien students often required time to process human approaches to problems, as though the concepts were too foreign to integrate immediately. Professor Vexnull's form stabilized, becoming more solid than Marcus had ever seen her. "Marcus-chun, would you be willing to participate in a practical demonstration? I have an engineering problem that has been unsolved for approximately 300 years. Multiple species have attempted mathematical solutions without success." "Of course, Professor." The classroom's central holographic projector activated, displaying a 3-dimensional structure that hurt Marcus's eyes to look at directly. The structure appeared to be a space station or facility of some kind, but its geometry was impossible. Sections seemed to fold in on themselves, while other parts extended into spaces that couldn't exist. "This is the Nexus Station," Professor Vexnull explained. It was designed by the ancient Kethmori civilization to serve as a hub for interdimensional travel. The station exists simultaneously in 7 different dimensions, allowing it to serve as a connection point between realities that would otherwise be completely isolated from each other. Stone beneath stars rumbled a question through the translation system. If the station already exists and functions, what is the problem that requires solving? "The problem," Professor Vexnull said, "is that the station is slowly collapsing. The dimensional anchors that hold it stable across multiple realities are failing, but we cannot determine why. The mathematical models suggest that the station should be perfectly stable indefinitely. Yet sensor data confirms that it loses approximately 0.00 3% of its structural integrity each standard galactic year. Marcus studied the holographic display more carefully. The longer he looked at it, the less impossible it seemed. The folded geometry began to make sense if he imagined it as a single structure viewed from multiple dimensional perspectives simultaneously. Professor, do you have historical data about the station's construction and operation? Certainly. Professor Vexnull waved one of her partially materialized appendages, and the display filled with scrolling data streams. Construction began 4,847 standard years ago and was completed 4,831 years ago. The station operated at full capacity for approximately 3,200 years before the first signs of degradation were detected. Marcus absorbed the information, but something felt wrong about the numbers. Professor, what was the station's intended operational lifespan? The Kethmori designed it to function indefinitely. The materials and dimensional anchoring systems should not degrade under normal conditions. But what if the conditions aren't normal? Marcus asked, what if the station is being used in ways the original designers didn't anticipate? Professor Vexnull's form flickered with what Marcus had learned was curiosity. Explain your reasoning. Marcus stood and approached the holographic display. His human eyes had an advantage here. He could see the structure as a unified whole rather than getting lost in its mathematical complexity. Look at the traffic patterns through the station over the last 1,000 years. Are they the same as they were during the first 3,000 years of operation? The display shifted to show dimensional transport routes through the station. The early patterns were elegant and symmetrical, with traffic flowing smoothly through all 7-dimensional layers. But the more recent patterns were chaotic and unbalanced, with some dimensional pathways heavily overloaded while others were barely used. Fascinating, chimed harmony of distant suns. The traffic patterns have become increasingly asymmetrical over time. Exactly, Marcus said, his excitement growing. The station was designed for balanced dimensional traffic, but the political and economic realities of the galaxy have changed. Some dimensional pathways are now major trade routes, while others are barely used. The uneven stress is causing the dimensional anchors to fail. Sharp Edge of Thought clicked skeptically, but the mathematical models account for varying traffic loads. The calculations show that the station should adapt automatically to changing conditions. Marcus shook his head. The math assumes that the station's dimensional anchoring systems are perfect, but what if they're not? What if they're actually biological or organic systems that can become tired or stressed? The suggestion sent ripples of discussion through the classroom. Professor Vexnull's form became completely solid. Her attention focused entirely on Marcus. Explain this biological hypothesis, she commanded. Well, humans often build things that seem mechanical, but actually depend on living systems, Marcus said. Our own bodies are incredibly complex machines, but they're made of biological materials that can get tired, stressed, or damaged. What if the Kethmori built the station using living dimensional anchors they're slowly wearing out from uneven use? Professor Vexnull manipulated the display, highlighting the station's dimensional anchor points. The anchors are indeed constructed from what we classified as exotic matter, but we never considered that they might be organic in nature. Can we test that hypothesis? Marcus asked. Indeed we can. Professor Vexnull's appendages danced through complex patterns, and the display shifted to show detailed scans of the dimensional anchors. According to these readings, remarkable. The anchors show patterns consistent with biological stress responses. They are not mechanical devices at all, but living organisms that have been maintaining dimensional stability for nearly 5,000 years. The classroom erupted in clicking, chiming, and other sounds of amazement. Stone beneath stars rumbled something that the translation system rendered as profound respect, while Sharp Edge of Thought's mandibles clicked in what Marcus hoped was approval rather than continued skepticism. If the anchors are living organisms, harmony of distant suns chimed, then the solution may not be engineering, but medicine. They may need rest or treatment rather than replacement or reinforcement. Professor Vexnell nodded approvingly. An excellent insight. Marcus Chun, your approach has revealed a fundamental misunderstanding that has persisted for over 1,000 years. We have been trying to solve an engineering problem when we should have been addressing a biological one. But how did you figure that out so quickly? Asked a new voice. Marcus turned to see another human entering the classroom, the first human he had encountered at the academy besides himself. The newcomer was older, perhaps in her 40s, with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to command. I don't believe we've met, the woman continued, extending her hand in the traditional human greeting. Dr. Sarah Kim, cultural anthropologist and xenobiologist. I'm here as part of a new exchange program between Earth and the Academy. Marcus shook her hand gratefully. Marcus Chun, I'm just a student here, though apparently I have some unusual approaches to problem solving. Doktor Kim Simidet. So I've heard. Your reputation has reached Earth, Mr. Chun. The Academy's reports about human cognitive approaches have caused quite a stir in our scientific community. Professor Vexnell interrupted the reunion. Dr. Kim, your arrival is fortuitous. Perhaps you can provide additional insight into the biological hypothesis that Marcus has proposed. Dr. Kim studied the holographic display of Nexus Station with professional interest. This is fascinating. The dimensional anchor structures show clear signs of biological organization. I would hypothesize that the Kethmori didn't build the station so much as grow it, using some form of dimensional life form as the foundation. If that's true, Marcus said, following the logic, then the solution might be relatively simple. We need to figure out how to help the organisms rest or regenerate. Simple in concept, perhaps, Professor Vexnell replied, but challenging in execution. How does one provide medical care to organisms that exist in 7 dimensions simultaneously? Dr. Kim and Marcus exchanged glances. Professor, Dr. Kim said slowly, would it be possible for us to visit the station? Sometimes the best way to understand a biological system is to observe it directly. Professor Vexnell's form flickered with surprise. Visit Nexus Station? That would require authorization from the Academy Council, as well as special dimensional transport arrangements. The station exists partially outside normal space-time. But it's possible. Marcus asked. Theoretically, yes. However, the dimensional stresses involved in such a journey are considerable. Most species require extensive preparation and protective equipment to survive in multidimensional space. Dr. Himsimidet. Professor, humans have a long history of going places we probably shouldn't go and figuring out how to survive once we get there. I think we'd be willing to take the risk if it means solving this problem. Over the following days, Marcus found himself at the center of an increasingly complex web of academy politics and scientific bureaucracy. The proposal to visit Nexus Station had captured the imagination of faculty and students alike, but it also raised questions about the appropriate level of risk for an experimental mission. The Academy Council was composed of representatives from all member species, and their debates were legendary for both their complexity and their duration. Marcus attended several sessions as an observer, watching beings argue in languages that existed only in mathematical equations or emotional harmonics that bypass conventional communication entirely. Dr. Lythandra, the Vex Theory representative, chimed her support for the mission. The potential for advancing our understanding of dimensional biology justifies the risks involved. Her crystalline voice resonated through the council chambers. However, Counselor Threshcax of the Kithara strongly disagreed. Sending inexperienced beings into multidimensional space based on untested hypotheses violates every principle of cautious scientific advancement. His mandibles clicked with disapproval. The debate continued for 3 full days before Academy Director Zorthak called for a final vote. The director was ancient even by galactic standards, a being whose species had transcended physical form millions of years ago and now existed as pure consciousness inhabiting sophisticated mechanical bodies. The motion to authorize an expedition to Nexus Station is approved by a margin of 7 votes, Director Zorthak announced, his synthesized voice carrying the weight of final authority. However, the mission will be considered a full Academy research expedition, with appropriate safety protocols and faculty supervision. Marcus felt a mixture of excitement and terror as the implications sank in. He was going to visit a space station that existed in 7 dimensions simultaneously, inhabited by unknown life forms that might hold the key to understanding entirely new forms of biology. Dr. Kim found him after the council session concluded. "Well, Mr. Chun, it looks like you're going to get a chance to test your theories in person. Are you ready for this?" Marcus looked out through the Academy's massive viewing ports at the stars beyond. Somewhere among those distant lights was a space station that had been slowly dying for 1,000 years, maintained by living organisms that no one had thought to consider as anything other than exotic matter. "Dr. Kim," he said, "I think ready is probably the wrong word. But I'm definitely willing to find out what happens when a human tries to practice medicine on a patient that exists in 7 dimensions." The expedition would launch in 1 week, giving the team time to prepare for dimensional travel and to study everything known about Keth Mori biotechnology. As Marcus returned to his quarters to begin preparations, he realized that his journey to the Academy had become something far more significant than he had ever imagined. He had come to learn how to think like the galaxy's greatest minds. Instead, he was discovering that sometimes the most important breakthroughs came from thinking in ways that no one else had ever considered possible. The dimensional transport vessel probabilities edge was unlike anything Marcus had ever imagined, even after weeks of studying multidimensional engineering. The ship existed as a series of interconnected spheres that seemed to phase in and out of reality, connected by corridors that appeared to extend infinitely in some directions while being impossibly compressed in others. Marcus stood in the central observation chamber, watching space bend and twist around them as the ship navigated through dimensions that human eyes were never meant to perceive. The protective neural dampeners that all dimensional travelers wore helped filter out the most disorienting aspects of the journey. But Marcus could still feel reality shifting around him in ways that made his stomach lurch. Dr. Sarah Kim stood beside him, consulting readings from a device that measured dimensional stability. "According to these instruments, we're currently traveling through 6 dimensions simultaneously," she said, her voice carrying a note of wonder. "The math suggests this should be impossible, but here we are." The expedition team was small, but carefully selected. Besides Marcus and Dr. Kim, the group included Professor Vexnull, whose partial existence in the probability void made her naturally suited for dimensional travel; Stone Beneath Stars, whose Urdok's physiology proved remarkably resistant to dimensional stress; and Commander Swyxtal of the Academy's Emergency Response Team, a being whose species specialized in surviving hostile environments. The ship's captain was a member of the enigmatic Nexus species, beings who existed naturally in multiple dimensions and serve as navigators for the most dangerous journeys through known space. Captain Veldar appeared as a constantly shifting geometric pattern that spoke through harmonious musical tones. "We are approaching Nexus Station," Captain Veldar announced, the translation system rendering the complex harmonics as words. "Dimensional anchor points are coming into sensor range. All passengers should prepare for transition to station normal space." Marcus felt the ship shudder as it began to align itself with the station's dimensional matrix. Through the observation chamber's impossible windows, he could see the station beginning to materialize around them. The structure was even more magnificent than the Academy's holographic displays had suggested, a vast crystalline complex that seemed to exist in all directions at once. "Remarkable," Stone Beneath Stars rumbled. "The station appears to be grown rather than constructed. The structural patterns resemble biological tissue more than engineered materials." Professor Vexnull nodded, her form becoming more solid as they approached the station. The dimensional readings confirmed Marcus's hypothesis. The entire structure is supported by living organisms that exist across multiple dimensional layers simultaneously. The docking process took nearly an hour, as the ship had to carefully synchronize with the station's complex dimensional rotation cycles. When the airlock finally opened, Marcus stepped into what could only be described as a living corridor. The walls pulsed gently with bioluminescent patterns, and the floor felt soft beneath his feet, like walking on living tissue. "Welcome to Nexus Station," came a voice from everywhere and nowhere at once. "I am the station consciousness, the collective intelligence of the dimensional anchor organisms. You seek to understand why we grow weak." Marcus exchanged glances with Dr. Kim. Neither of them had expected the station itself to be capable of communication. "Yes," Dr. Kim responded. "We believe you may be experiencing stress from unbalanced dimensional traffic patterns. We're here to help if we can." "Help," the station consciousness repeated, the word echoing through dimensions. "It has been long since beings offered help rather than simply using our services. Come, we will show you the strain we bear." The corridor began to move around them, not like a mechanical transport system, but more like being carried through the bloodstream of some vast organism. Marcus watched as the walls shifted and flowed, carrying the expedition team deeper into the station's living architecture. They emerged into a vast chamber that served as one of the station's primary dimensional junction points. Here, Marcus could see the traffic patterns that were causing the problem. Massive cargo vessels from the hegemony trade routes poured through one-dimensional gateway in an endless stream, while 3 other gateways stood nearly empty. The dimensional stress was visible as ripples in space-time that made the air itself seem to vibrate. "The imbalance grows worse each cycle," the station consciousness explained. "We stretch ourselves to accommodate the heavy traffic through the primary gateway, while other parts of our being atrophy from disuse. We are dying by degrees, pulled apart by forces we cannot resist." Dr. Kim activated her biological scanners, studying the dimensional anchor organisms that were visible as translucent, crystalline structures embedded in the chamber walls. "The readings are incredible," she said. "These organisms are simultaneously biological and quantum mechanical. They exist in a state of controlled dimensional flux that allows them to anchor space-time itself." Marcus approached one of the anchor organisms, drawn by an intuitive sense that direct observation would reveal more than any scanner. The organism was beautiful in an alien way, like a living crystal that pulsed with inner light. As he drew closer, he could feel the incredible forces it was channeling, holding multiple dimensions in stable alignment through what could only be described as an act of will. "You're in pain," Marcus said quietly, addressing the organism directly. The response came not through words, but through a wave of emotion that washed over him. Exhaustion, strain, and a deep loneliness that spoke of millennia spent maintaining cosmic stability without acknowledgement or care. "They're not just machines," Marcus said to the others. "They're intelligent. They understand what they're doing, and they're suffering from the imbalance." Stone beneath stars approached another anchor organism with characteristic Urdox deliberation. "If they are intelligent, perhaps they can be reasoned with. Can the traffic patterns be redistributed more evenly?" "The traffic patterns are determined by economic and political factors outside our control," Commander HFY pointed out. "The hegemony routes carry the majority of interdimensional trade because they connect the most profitable systems. But what if we can make the other routes more attractive?" Marcus asked. "Dr. Kim, is it possible for the anchor organisms to modify the dimensional pathways?" Dr. Kim studied her scanner readings more carefully. "Theoretically, yes. These organisms appear to have conscious control over how they shape dimensional space. They could potentially create more efficient pathways through the underused gateways." The station consciousness spoke again, its voice carrying new interest. "Such modifications would be possible, but they would require our full cooperation. We have maintained these pathways unchanged for thousands of years, following the patterns established by our creators. But Your creators are gone, Professor Vexnell observed. You are free to adapt the station to current conditions rather than maintaining ancient configurations. Freedom, the station consciousness repeated thoughtfully. We had not considered that our situation might involve choice rather than obligation. Marcus felt a sudden inspiration. What if we could help you redesign the entire station? Not just redistributing traffic, but creating a more efficient and comfortable configuration for the current state of the galaxy. The reaction from the anchor organisms was immediate and overwhelming. Waves of excitement, hope, and cautious optimism flooded through the chamber as thousands of intelligent beings contemplated the possibility of change. You help us remake ourselves? The station consciousness asked. After so many millennia of serving others, you offer partnership? Absolutely, Dr. Kim said firmly. But we'll need to work together. Your understanding of dimensional mechanics, combined with our knowledge of biological systems and traffic optimization. What followed was 3 days of the most intense collaboration Marcus had ever experienced. The anchor organisms could manipulate dimensional space in ways that defied conventional physics, while the human perspective provided insights into efficiency and adaptation that the organisms had never considered. The breakthrough came when Marcus suggested treating the station not as a fixed structure, but as a living ecosystem that could grow and adapt to changing conditions. Instead of forcing traffic through predetermined pathways, the station could develop new routes organically based on actual usage patterns. The anchor organisms embraced this concept with enthusiasm that was literally earth-shaking. The station began to reconfigure itself around them, growing new corridors and dimensional pathways while allowing overused sections to rest and regenerate. The process was like watching evolution in fast forward, as the station adapted itself to serve both its own needs and the requirements of galactic commerce. Fascinating, Professor Vexnell observed as walls flowed past them like living water. The organisms are not merely reshaping the station's physical structure, but also its dimensional topology. They are creating entirely new forms of space-time architecture. Stone beneath stars rumbled approvingly as they watched a new dimensional gateway form in what had previously been empty space. The traffic flow through this new route will be 23% more efficient than the previous pathway, while reducing stress on the primary anchor organisms by 67%. Commander SYX Tau was monitoring galactic communications networks. The changes are already being noticed by commercial shipping. Transit times through Nexus Station have improved by an average of 15% across all routes. But the most remarkable change was in the anchor organisms themselves. Marcus could feel their relief and satisfaction as they settled into their new configuration. For the first time in millennia, they were working in harmony with the traffic they carried rather than being overwhelmed by it. We are grateful, the station consciousness said as the expedition team prepared to depart. You have given us something we had not dared hope for, the recognition that we are more than tools to be used, and the freedom to shape our own existence. Dr. Kim smiled as she packed away her equipment. You've taught us something equally valuable. We've discovered that intelligence and consciousness can take forms we never imagined, and that cooperation is possible across barriers we thought were insurmountable. As the probabilities edge departed Nexus Station, Marcus stood once again in the observation chamber, watching the station recede into the dimensional distance. But now the structure looked different to his eyes. Where before he had seen an impossible architectural marvel, he now saw a living community of beings who had found new purpose and joy in their cosmic role. The Academy Council is going to be very interested in our report, Professor Vexnell commented. This expedition has fundamentally changed our understanding of the relationship between consciousness and dimensional engineering. More than that, Marcus replied, I think we've discovered something important about cooperation itself. When different forms of intelligence work together, they can create solutions that none of them could achieve alone. Stone beneath stars rumbled thoughtfully. The humans have a saying, do they not? The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Perhaps this is what we have witnessed here. Exactly, Dr. Kim agreed. And I suspect this is just the beginning. If one ancient station can be transformed through cooperation between human and alien intelligence, imagine what else might be possible. As they traveled back toward Kepler Station, Marcus reflected on how much his life had changed since solving that first void puzzle. He had come to the Academy, hoping to learn how to think like the galaxy's greatest minds. Instead, he had discovered that the most powerful solutions often came from combining different ways of thinking, from bridging the gap between human intuition and alien logic. The expedition to Nexus Station had proven that humans had something unique to offer the galactic community, but it had also shown that the true potential lay not in human superiority, but in human collaboration. When species work together, sharing their different perspectives and capabilities, they could solve problems that had seemed impossible for thousands of years. Marcus realized that his role at the Academy was evolving from student to something more like a translator, someone who could help different forms of intelligence understand and cooperate with each other. It was a responsibility he had never expected, but one that felt more important than any lesson he might learn from books or quantum-linked educational matrices. The galaxy was full of puzzles waiting to be solved, and Marcus was beginning to understand that the most important solutions would come not from any single brilliant mind, but from the collective intelligence that emerged when diverse beings chose to work together toward common goals. 6 months after the successful transformation of Nexus Station, Marcus Chin found himself standing before the Academy Council once again, but this time his role was dramatically different. Instead of being a curious observer, he was presenting the preliminary findings of what had become known as the Collaborative Consciousness Project, a research initiative that studied the effects of interspecies cognitive cooperation. The council chambers had been modified to accommodate the project's growing scope. Representatives from 17 different species sat in specialized environments designed to optimize their cognitive performance, while quantum translation matrices ensured that thoughts and ideas could flow freely between minds that had evolved under entirely different evolutionary pressures. The data is undeniable, Marcus said, addressing the assembled beings with a confidence he never would have imagined possessing when he first arrived at the Academy. When different forms of consciousness work together on complex problems, the resulting solutions consistently exceed what any single species could achieve independently. Director Zorthak's mechanical form leaned forward with interest. Please elaborate on the specific mechanisms that enable this enhanced problem-solving capability. Marcus activated the holographic display system, which showed a complex web of interconnected nodes representing different types of cognitive processing. Each species brings unique cognitive strengths to collaborative efforts. Humans contribute pattern recognition and intuitive leaps. The Vextheri provide mathematical precision and harmonic thinking. Urdox offer stability and long-term perspective. Kithera bring analytical depth and systematic approaches. But how do these different cognitive modes integrate? Asked Counselor Lythandra, her crystalline form chiming with curiosity. Our research has always assumed that different forms of consciousness would conflict rather than complement each other. Dr. Kim, who had become Marcus's primary research partner, stepped forward to address the question. That's where human social cognition becomes particularly valuable. Humans evolved as highly social creatures with a natural ability to understand and coordinate with other minds. We serve as cognitive translators, helping different forms of consciousness understand and build upon each other's contributions. The demonstration that followed was unlike anything the Academy had ever witnessed. Marcus had arranged for representatives from 5 different species to work together on a problem that had stumped galactic researchers for over 2 centuries, the paradox of the vanishing fleet. 3,000 years ago, an entire hegemony military fleet had disappeared while investigating anomalous readings in the void sectors. No trace of the fleet had ever been found, despite extensive search efforts using the most advanced detection technologies available. The incident remained one of the galaxy's greatest unsolved mysteries. Traditional approaches to this mystery have focused on technological solutions. Marcus explained as the collaborative team took their positions around the central problem-solving matrix. We've analyzed engine signatures, studied gravitational anomalies, and investigated every known form of space-time distortion. But what if we're approaching this from the wrong direction entirely? The team included Sharp Edge of Thought, representing the Kithera's systematic analytical capabilities, Harmony of Distant Suns, providing Vextheory mathematical intuition, Stone Beneath Stars, offering Urdok stability and historical perspective, Dr. Kim, contributing human biological and anthropological knowledge, and Marcus himself, serving as the cognitive coordinator. Begin with the known facts, Marcus said, initiating the collaborative process. Sharp Edge of Thought. What does the data tell us about the fleet's last known position and activities? The Kithera's analysis was typically thorough and precise. Fleet Admiral Threshval was investigating reports of artificial energy signatures in Sector 7, Alpha 9. The fleet consisted of 347 vessels ranging from exploration frigates to battle cruisers. Last communication indicated they had detected structures of unknown origin before all contact was lost. Harmony of Distant Suns. Marcus continued, what mathematical patterns can you identify in the energy signatures the fleet was investigating? The Vextheory's response came as a complex harmonic sequence that the translation systems rendered as both audible tones and visual mathematics. The energy patterns show characteristics consistent with folded spacetime, but the mathematics suggest intentional manipulation rather than natural phenomena. The patterns are too regular, too purposeful to be accidental. Stone Beneath Stars. What historical context might be relevant here? The Urdox's deep voice rumbled through the chamber. 3,000 years ago was the era of the Great Expansion, when many species were first developing interstellar travel capabilities. Several civilizations from that period subsequently vanished from galactic records, their ultimate fate unknown. Dr. Kim, from a biological perspective, what might cause an entire fleet to vanish without a trace? If we rule out technological solutions, we have to consider environmental or biological factors, something that could affect living beings rather than just ships and equipment. Marcus felt the familiar sensation of pieces beginning to align, the cognitive harmony that emerged when different forms of intelligence worked together toward a common goal. What if the fleet didn't encounter a technology or a natural phenomenon, but another form of consciousness entirely? The suggestion sent ripples of discussion through the council chambers. Such a possibility had never been seriously considered because it fell outside conventional frameworks for understanding the incident. Elaborate on this hypothesis, Director Zorthak commanded. Marcus looked at his collaborative team, feeling their combined cognitive power focusing on the new possibility. What if the void sectors contain a form of consciousness that exists in ways we don't understand? Something that perceived the fleet as a threat or an opportunity for communication, and responded in ways that seem like disappearance to us, but represent something entirely different from its perspective. Sharp Edge of Thought's mandibles clicked rapidly as the Kithera processed this new framework. If such a consciousness existed, it would explain the artificial nature of the energy signatures. They were not random phenomena, but attempts at communication or interaction. Harmony of Distant Suns chimed agreement. The mathematical patterns could represent a form of mathematics based on consciousness rather than physics, concepts we lack the framework to understand. Stone Beneath Stars added historical weight to the theory. The civilizations that vanished during the Great Expansion may have encountered the same consciousness. Their disappearances were not destruction, but transformation or translation into forms of existence we cannot perceive. Dr. Kim no Ditoy. And if this consciousness operates on biological or psychological principles rather than technological ones, it would explain why our searches have found no physical evidence. We've been looking for wreckage when we should have been looking for signs of consciousness transfer or dimensional translation. The implications of the collaborative solution were staggering. If the team was correct, the vanishing fleet incident represented first contact with a form of consciousness so alien that the galaxy's greatest minds have been unable to recognize it as such for 3,000 years. Director Zorthak's mechanical form was perfectly still for several minutes as the ancient intelligence processed the hypothesis. This theory suggests that we may have been unconsciously avoiding entire regions of space that are actually inhabited by non-material consciousness. The implications for our understanding of galactic civilization are profound. More than that, Marcus said, his excitement building. If we're right, this could be the key to understanding what happened to dozens of lost civilizations. They weren't destroyed. They were contacted by forms of consciousness that offered alternatives to physical existence. The Academy Council voted unanimously to authorize an expedition to the void sectors, using the collaborative consciousness approach to attempt communication with whatever intelligence might exist there. The mission would be the most ambitious undertaking in Academy history, combining the cognitive capabilities of multiple species to bridge the gap between physical and non-physical forms of consciousness. As preparations for the expedition began, Marcus found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him to this point. He had started as a single human trying to prove that his species belonged among the galaxy's intellectual elite. Now, he was leading efforts to expand the very definition of what intelligence and consciousness could be. The void puzzle he had solved on his first day at the Academy had been more than a test of problem-solving ability. It had been the first step toward understanding that the universe contained forms of intelligence far stranger and more wonderful than any single species could imagine alone. Dr. Kim joined him in his quarters as he prepared for the upcoming expedition. "Are you ready for this?" she asked. "If we're right about what's out there, this mission could change everything we think we know about consciousness and existence." Marcus looked out at the stars beyond Kepler Station, knowing that somewhere in the void between them waited intelligence that had been trying to communicate for millennia, using methods so alien that entire fleets had vanished before anyone recognized the attempts as communication. "I'm ready," he said. "Whatever we find out there, whatever form of consciousness is waiting in the void, I think we finally have the tools to understand it. Not because humans are special, but because we've learned to combine our capabilities with those of every other intelligent species we've encountered." The expedition would launch in 2 weeks, carrying a crew of volunteers from 17 different species, all trained in collaborative consciousness techniques. They would venture into regions of space that had been considered empty and lifeless, seeking contact with minds that might exist beyond the boundaries of physical matter. As Marcus prepared for what might be the most important mission in galactic history, he realized that his greatest achievement wasn't solving an ancient puzzle or transforming a dying station. It was helping to create a framework for cooperation that allowed different forms of intelligence to work together toward goals that none of them could achieve alone. The instructor had passed out a puzzle box, and the human had solved it before taking a seat. But the real puzzle had been much larger and more complex. How to bring together the diverse intelligences of the galaxy in ways that enhanced rather than competed with each other. That puzzle was still being solved, one collaboration at a time, as the Academy worked to build a future where consciousness in all its forms could flourish together among the stars. And somewhere in the vast distances between worlds, other intelligences waited patiently for contact, ready to add their own unique perspectives to the growing symphony of galactic consciousness. The journey that had begun with a simple demonstration of human problem-solving had evolved into something far greater. Proof that the universe was filled with wonders that could only be understood through the combined efforts of minds working in harmony across the infinite diversity of thought and being.